Hi, I'm Chad with Move for Guitar. This lesson is from our series CAGED Theory. In this lesson, I'm going to explain how you can use the CAGED system to accompany other musicians. First off, if you like all the diagrams for this series, including the diagrams for this lesson, you can download our free e-guide, CAGED Theory. But I am working on it as I'm filming this lesson, so it might not be available as you're watching this lesson. If it is available, a link will pop up on the screen that'll allow you to download it. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to download it when it is available. This is part 7 from our series CAGED Theory. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So now that you know how to use the CAGED system to find major and minor triads, I'm going to show you how you can use those triads to accompany other musicians. So this is where the practical use of triads comes into play. This is one way you can use triads practically and not just think about them theoretically. And this is a really important topic. We're not diving too deep into it because that's not what this series is about. I'll have other lessons that dive a lot deeper, but it's a really important topic to understand how to play with other musicians, and especially if you're not the main instrument, how to accompany other musicians or to comp with other musicians and add to the music while staying out of the way. That's a really important concept to understand, and it's something that is really hard to learn how to do when you're a beginner just trying out, because you learn certain shapes, that's the only tools you have. But I'm going to show you how you can use triads as one tool to be able to do that. So we're just going to take a really basic chord progression. This is one of the most common chord progressions out there in popular music, a 1, 5, 6, 4, and we're showing in the key of C, which is C, G, A minor, F. So someone on guitar might just play open chords when they're playing this. They'll play C major open chord, a G major open chord, an A minor open chord, and an F major open chord. So if you're playing with a singer-songwriter or something, or in a lot of different situations, that might be what the main rhythm instrument is doing. And I'm talking about mainly in this lesson accompanying other guitarists, because that's a really important thing to understand. Because when you're playing with another guitarist, you usually don't want to just play the exact same thing. So if another guitarist is playing open chords like I just showed, typically you're not going to want to play those exact same open chords. Unless for some reason you're going for that effect where you just want that sound but you want it to be a lot fuller, that's an option that you could use to do that. But in a lot of situations you want to stay out of the same register as the main instrument or as other instruments that you're playing with. And one way you can do that is using triads. So if someone was playing a C major open chord and you're playing along with them, you have options for any of the CAGED chords, but I'm just going to pick different ones and show you some options. And obviously there's a lot more options than what I'm showing. For one, you could play a C major bar chord that's using the E shape. That's a really common bar chord. The problem with doing this is that that's a really full sound, and if someone else is playing a really full open chord, that's not always the sound you want to go for, and it can get pretty muddy if you do that. So what you can do is take triads out of this shape like I showed you in the previous lessons, and you could take, for example, a root position triad on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th string out of that E major shape, and you could play this triad while the other guitarist is playing the open chord. And if you play this triad while the other guitarist is playing the open chord, you're going to be out of his register or her register, whoever the guitarist is. So it's not going to get muddy, and it's not going to sound like you're just creating a fuller sound playing the same thing, unless, like I said, that's what you're going for. And another thing you could do is if they're strumming away on those open chords, you could arpeggiate these chords or finger pick them. And arpeggiating just meaning picking the notes one at a time instead of just strumming along. So maybe you strum along, it just depends on the situation. I can't get into all that in this lesson, but this is one way that you could play along with them, and this will automatically sound better than if you just play the same thing as them or if you play another really full chord. Then the next chord in the 1, 5, 6, 4 is a G major. If they're playing that open G major chord, you could play another G major chord using one of the CAGED chords like this C shape one, but that's still fairly full sounding, so you could break it down to one of the triads within it, and you could use it on the same string sets that you played the other triad to let it have the best voice leading possible. And that's not always what the sound you're going for, but this is an option. And you could play this triad from that C shape, and as they're playing that open chord, this will sound really good, especially if you arpeggiate it or play some other rhythm than they're playing. or maybe have a different effect on your guitar. If you're playing with electric, maybe it's something more spacey and they're playing something overdriven. There's just tons of options, but using this triad is a good way that you can stay out of their way and add to the sound at the same time. The next chord we were talking about them playing would be an A minor chord, and we were talking about them playing an A minor open chord. You could play one of the CAGED chords like a C minor shape, and this is still fairly full, and this root down low might make it a little muddy, although it wouldn't be too bad with this shape. But you could just break it down to a triad and play on the same string sets you're playing the other triads, and then again you're going to stay out of their way while adding to their music, and that's going to sound really good. And then the last chord they were playing was an F major chord in the open position. You could play one of the F chords as a CAGED chord, and you could use something like the A shape. And instead of playing the full A shape, which would be pretty muddy, you could break it down to one of the triads and use the triads on the same string sets as the other, and then it would sound really good along with them playing that open chord. And that's just one option. Another option, even if we were staying pretty much in the same position that I showed the last ones, instead of using the triads that I showed you, you could use triads on the first, second, and third string, so you'd have an even higher register than the other guitarist, and that might be the effect that you're going for. It just depends on the playing situation. So you could play this triad out of the E shape as your C major chord while they're playing the open chord. That would sound really good. Then on the G major, you could play this triad on the first, second, and third strings while they're playing the open chord. That would sound really good. Then for the A minor, you could visualize the D minor shape and play this triad because it would be on the first, second, and third string close to the other triads that you're playing. That would sound really good while they're playing the open chord. And then for the F major, if you're still visualizing the A shape, you could play the triad that's on the first, second, and third string, and that would sound really good with their F major open chord. And you'll notice that these triads that I showed you were on the same string sets and all close to the same position, so they weren't jumping up and down the fretboard. And a lot of times that's what you want to do. That's not always what you want to do. You might be going for effects where you need bigger interval jumps, or going to different string sets is going to sound good. But in certain situations, it sounds really good while one musician is playing those open chords or whatever they're playing, for you to stay close to one position. But like I said, maybe in the playing situation you're in, you want to make bigger jumps from higher to lower or whatever. And like I said, that's just a couple options. There's tons of options, as you can imagine, with all the different CAGED chords and the triads within them, or depending what the other musician is playing. If they're playing higher up, you're going to want to play lower down usually. So it all just depends on the playing situation, but this is one way you can use triads to accompany other musicians, specifically other guitarists. And you don't have to just use these triads to accompany other musicians. You could use them on their own. You could just play triads even if you were the main instrument. You could just play triads and strum along rhythms or whatever, and that can sound good depending on the situation. And that's done in reggae a lot, where you use triads and strum along as the main instrument. So it just depends. I'm not saying that you have to use triads only for accompanying other musicians. You can use them even if you're the main instrument. And like I said, we'll dive deeper into all of this in other lessons. I just wanted to give you one practical use for triads. So that's how you can use the CAGED system to accompany other musicians. Go ahead and move on to the next lesson, where I'm going to show you how you can use the CAGED system to help you when you're playing the major pentatonic scale. And be sure to download the e-guide. All the diagrams are in there, and be sure to subscribe because we add at least one new lesson every day.